and 2 became 3, 4, 5. Then had the opportunity in 2006 to take the company public. That brought a little bit more cash into the business, and we grew it more aggressively from there. Overall, 26 years of 20% plus compounded average growth rate, so every single year scale. We have 50,000 people that work in the company, and we've added new brands and new countries over the years. So it's been phenomenal. It's really just been a great experience. And it all sort of began with coming over to Central Europe. So I want to give you a sense of how really I knew nothing about where I was headed, and the lesson I take from that. So here I am. I just finished college. I wanted to come over and experience what was the biggest change happening in the world. So I got on a plane and I flew to Berlin and went to see the wall and went to see, what was happening with real estate development. When I was at Georgetown, I had started a small real estate company called Student Housing Association, and it had done pretty well. And so at 24 years old, I had $250,000 in my pocket, and I thought, well, that's all you need in life. I should just take a year off, and that's that. So I did. I took the money and came over for a life experience. And here I am, and I said, okay, well, I need to go see the further countries. I need to go to Poland and Czech and Hungary. And so I rented a car in Berlin, and I drove to the border outside of Poznan. And literally, the border control guys looked at me and just started laughing. Like, you really think you can drive a car from Germany into Poland? There's no way. It will be stolen the next day. So I thought, come on, there's no way. But it gives you a sense of how little I knew about the region I was going into. And it was true, most cars got stolen. So I had to go back to Berlin, gave up the car, and I got on a plane. But they've just told me my video is ready, so we're going to play a quick video because I want you to get a sense of the culture and spirit that exists in the company, and then I'll come back and tell you about how it got started. So let's play the video, please. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what a people-driven company we are. But let me take you back to before it got started. So I fly into Warsaw. I have the pleasure of getting to meet a few people that take me through the region. I go to Czech and Hungary, and I decide that I do not want to be in a capital. I want to actually see the change at a more grassroots level. So I get in a car and I drive around Poland, and I choose a city where I live, where the video headquarters there in Wrocław. It's in the southwest of Poland. And I get there, and it turns out that just after a couple of weeks of being there, the city has decided to auction off the first building on the main square. Wrocław, like a lot of European cities, had an old main square trading zone, and they're auctioning off the first privatization. So I participate in it. It's a whole other story how I end up winning the auction. I end up actually being the only person in the room, so it was kind of easy to win the auction. But I won, okay? I've decided that I'm going to build the first Class A office building in this city. And so after getting the deed, I start talking to this very small team. We had hired 2 people, and I was going to start the renovation of this building. And they said, well, if you want to make a Class A office building, you're going to need to go meet with the president of the telephone company to get phone lines and data lines. And you have to remember, this is 1993 in Poland, so phone lines and data lines, this was pre-internet, pre-cell phone, and data lines and phone lines were separated. And first of all, the fact that you have to go meet with the president of the phone company to get phone lines and data lines sort of like you're in a different place, yes? So I set up the meeting and I go meet this guy, and the meeting starts at 10 o'clock in the morning with a shot of vodka. And I was like, okay, I'm definitely not in America anymore. This is definitely something new. And I explained to the man, I've just traveled across Central Europe, and Wrocław was my favorite city. And I really would like to create something unique. I'd like to create the first Class A office building in the city. And it's 7 stories tall, and I need 100 phone lines and 50 data lines. And he just stares at me. There's this really awkward pause. So, being an American, what do? I talk louder and more aggressively, right? That's what we do. So I turn to my translator, because it must be his mistake, it's not mine, right? And I'm like, look, it's really simple. First Class A office building in the city, 7 stories, 100 phone lines, 50 data lines, okay? Just translate it. And his name was Norbert. And Norbert looks at me and he says, no, I need to explain something to you. My family has been waiting 15 years for 1 phone line. Can you imagine how sick I felt? I mean, literally, I felt completely sick to my stomach. The $250,000 that I thought was enough forever was now basically gone. 15 years to a 24-year-old sounds like a lifetime, because it basically is. And I thought I was done. And I must have looked like I was going to get sick on the poor president of the telephone company. And this continues for a few seconds. It seemed like my lifetime. The guy then says, I think I have some very good news for you. I can give you 4 phone lines and 3 data lines. Now, from 150, we're like nowhere in the ballpark, right? And I guess I should have been thankful, but I felt so sick I couldn't even be thankful. Thank God for Norbert. Norbert was like, thank you so much, sir, let's go. So we get back to the office, and Isabella, who was working for us, she's like, you got 4 phone lines and 3 data lines? Like, no way. How much did you pay him? I was like, I didn't pay him anything. She's like, no. Nobody gets phone lines without paying something. It's like, no, I didn't. So she says, well, this is incredible. So she has a friend who works at PKO Bank. PKO Bank at the time, still today, I think is the largest bank in Poland. she says, guess what? We have a building on the main square. We have 4 phone lines and 3 data lines. Would you like to rent the building? So the bank says, yes, we'll take 3 floors as long as we get 3 of the phone lines and all of the data lines. And they paid me $21, a dollar-based rent in Poland, which was unheard of. They paid me $21 a square meter, and they signed a 5-year lease. And then they were like, that building is so special, we'll loan you $2 million to fix it. So I guess I should have said thank you to the man for giving me the phone lines and data lines, right? So then I had 1 phone line left, don't forget. Well, what do you do if you have 1 phone line? You start a pizza restaurant, right? So I really didn't want to start a pizza restaurant. I had never worked in a restaurant in my life. I didn't know anything about it. I had a very high contact at PepsiCo, and I offered them to lease the building, lease the ground floor to put a restaurant in. They were like, Wrocław, Poland, where the hell is that? No, thank you. But if you think it's such a good idea, you can have the license. So they gave me the license for Pizza Hut, and we opened a restaurant, and it was fantastic. It just kind of took off immediately. So that first story has a ton of, life lessons within it. I think the most important for me was I realized that, first of all, I knew nothing, which is kind of evident from the story. I had no idea where I was, what the norms were, etc. I mean, it looks absurd not to have had a business plan, all the things that we hear about. But the guy at the telephone company saw that I was genuine. He saw that I was honestly trying to do something for the city. And I was completely vulnerable. I had failed completely. I was there, all my money was on the table. I had completely put myself out there for my own benefit, but also for the benefit of the city. And by being completely vulnerable, it opened up, I guess, his generosity in his heart. And he gave me everything he could give me, which, even though I thought it was nothing, turned out to be a ton. So I think as we go into some of the risks that we're going to talk about and how do you grow a business quickly, everybody has their ups and downs. I'm sure if we got everybody on this stage to tell a story about a good year and a bad year, everybody's had their good years and bad years. But we at AmRest continually put ourselves out there. And I want to teach you 3 Polish words before I get going any further. And that is wszystko jest możliwe. And what it means is anything is possible. And when I came to Poland in '93, there was really nothing here. I came in November of '92, my first trip. Believe me or not, there were no grocery stores. Try to imagine, there were no grocery stores. Everything was little kiosks. There was no Tesco, there was no Carrefour, there was no any of what we have today. You couldn't buy a cold beer. That's what drove me probably most crazy. You can't imagine, there was no highway in the entire country. So trying to get a culture of anything is possible into an ex-communist country was in and of itself showing that anything was possible. So the first 3 words I learned of Polish were wszystko jest możliwe, and even it sounds impossible. So I'm going to ask you all to just humor me, just to get you in the mindset that anything is possible. And we're going to say wszystko jest możliwe together. So wszystko. One more time. Wszystko. Jest? Jest. Możliwe. Wszystko jest możliwe. Beautiful. You guys are fantastic. Excellent. I love it. Really good. Okay, so now I'm going to fast forward. Luckily, that is not a picture of me. Okay? But it's not far off. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward 15 years into the future. So I've been through plenty of ups and downs, and there have been a lot of stories. But this is my next story of just taking it all completely to the edge of what most people think is reasonable and having that work out in my favor. So I'm a member of YPO, and at YPO there's an executive education course started at Harvard as part of the Harvard MBA segment. And I'm attending that, so I'm in Boston. It's the end of January, and I get a phone call on Friday, and I'm supposed to be leaving on Saturday. And it's a friend of mine, and he says, Henry, I don't know if you're aware, but Steve Winiger, who was a man who owned a very good restaurant business in Spain, who was trying to sell his business, my friend says, Steve's deal to sell his company just fell apart. And I think there's an opportunity for you to get back into the process if you're interested. And Steve had told me about the business a year before, but I didn't have any money. I couldn't afford to buy the business. We're talking about a 220 million euro acquisition. And so I was like, wow, that's really interesting, because this was probably the most profitable restaurant business in Europe on a standalone basis. But Spain was in a deep crisis. It was in the crisis earlier than most of the world went into the recession, and it lasted longer and it was deeper. But his business had continued to grow. So I call Steve up and I say, Steve, I hear that your deal with the private equities just fell apart, and there's a chance that I could come look at the business again. He goes, Henry, I don't think so. I don't think that's really realistic, because yes, it did fall apart. We didn't go to closing, but that's just because the private equity fund, they were in Fund 4, ran out of enough money, and they need to buy our business in Fund 5, and Fund 5 won't legally close for 18 days. So they need to wait 18 days, and they're going to close. I said, so you're telling me I have 18 days? And he says, well, sure. I would much rather sell it to you, an industrial person, than to a private equity, so sure. So I get on a plane from Boston, I fly directly there, I land there on Sunday, I meet with Steve and his wife, and we talk, and I said, I think I can come up with the money at this time, I think I can do it. And he says, great, we'll do it with you if you can get it done in 18 days. I said, well, can I buy the due diligence? Does it already exist? What documentation's already been done? He's like, well, basically, we were supposed to go to closing yesterday, so everything's there. You can come in. I said, okay, so I'll show up on Wednesday with my whole team, and we'll be ready to do this, but I haven't been home in 10 days. I really have to go see my wife and kids. Let me fly home for a day, and then I'll come back Tuesday or Wednesday with the team, and we'll do all the work necessary, and we'll be done in 18 days. So he says, great, yes, we shake hands. I get on a plane, I fly back. One quick lesson here, if you're in the middle of a deal, never leave the deal. So you see where this is going. So I come back on Tuesday, and Steve really hadn't talked much about his private equity partner, but he had a private equity partner named Corpfin, and the head of Corpfin's name is Carlos. And Steve came in and he said, look, I took this to Carlos, and they just can't go along with this risk. It's too much risk, because this is the best performing asset in their fund. They want to raise another fund, and they just can't take the risk that this deal falls apart. And they've spoken with Lion Capital. Lion Capital is a big PE firm out of London. We know they're going to close. We can't take the risk to upset this. And I said, that's just not cool. You told me, we shook hands. He goes, yeah, but I've worked with Lion for the last 7 years. They've been great partners to me. I just can't overrule them like that. Wouldn't be good. And I said, let me meet with Carlos. So Carlos and I talk, and I'm like, Carlos, these guys showed up one day before closing and told you they couldn't close. And now they're telling you they're going to close in 18 days. I said, what kind of partner does that? Like, they didn't give you any warning. They're not good guys. You need to let the good guys win. So I've automatically created this great division, right? There's the good guys and the bad guys, and we're ready to play. So I'm like, Carlos, come on. What do I need to do? We can do this. We'll get it done in 18 days. And it goes back and forth. And this is Tuesday, by the way. And no, it's Wednesday by now, sorry. So it's Wednesday, and he says, Henry, okay, let me talk to my partners, and I'll see what we can do. So now it's like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and Carlos doesn't come back. Steve comes back, who I'm pretty friendly with, and he says, Henry, I'm so sorry. They've met, there's no way. They just can't take this risk. And I'd much rather continue in a partnership with somebody who understands the industry than have to deal with a private equity and getting them up to speed, etc. But I can't overrule them. So Carlos comes in, letting Steve have done the dirty work. And I'm like, Carlos, there's no way. Like, the good guys have to win this. What do I need to do? And he said, well, when we called Lion Capital CEO, he said he was really nervous about the situation. He didn't think it was good that we were shopping it around. They just had an internal issue. And he was going to fly in on Friday at 12 o'clock and was going to sign extension papers and put a guarantee on from Lion Capital. So I said, oh, you're telling me I've got till Friday? He's like, you got to be kidding me. You're not going to get a 200 million euro deal done by Friday. And I said, why not? He's like, you're wasting my time. It's 6 o'clock. Everybody's going home. Get out. Just get out. So I'm literally being thrown out of the office, told that I'm being completely unrealistic. So I just fall down on the ground, literally. I fall down on the ground and I say, I'm not leaving, you'll have to call the police. Now, has anybody ever used that as a negotiating tactic? You ever tried that? So there I am, I'm laying on the floor in the office, and I'm saying, the good guys have to win, I'm not leaving till we have a deal. He's like, you are mad. You're completely crazy. Okay, are you telling me you can close by Friday? I said, I'll close by Thursday. So there's no doubt. That's tomorrow, by the way, right? So now the fun starts. So it dawns on me after a little bit more discussion that really the biggest problem is the fact that Carlos wants to keep 25% of the deal. They don't want to sell the whole thing. They want to keep 25% because they want to ride for the next wave. So I say to Carlos, after this dawns on me, I'm like, you know, Carlos, the biggest problem to getting this deal done is that we're not going to speak the same language and we've got to get all this documentation done. But Steve is an entrepreneur, and Steve and I can probably go sit in a room for an hour and a half, shake hands, and know that we'll do the paperwork next week. So if you would exit, and all I have to do is do a share purchase agreement instead of a shareholders agreement, I could probably write a share purchase agreement that would satisfy you in the next 24 hours. But you need to exit. Now, he was from private equity, so what's his next comment? What's his next comment? How much? Right? I mean, that's what the guy is, right? So, it's unbelievable how predictable it was. So he says, okay, let me go talk to my partners. So he comes back in, we're now 7:30 or so, and he says, for $3 million more. $3 million on a $202 million deal wasn't so bad. I said, done, agreed. Now, we need to get this deal done. So we call in Deloitte, the lawyers, the accountants we had. There were about 32 people working on this deal internally, and I said, everybody, we've just agreed, we're closing tomorrow at 2 o'clock, so nobody's going home out of this group. We're all locked into this building. Now, the professionals didn't take great, that wasn't a joyful night for them. So we get that message out. Everybody's like, wow, this is the craziest deal I've ever worked on in my life, but sure, okay, let's get going. Steve and I sit down, we talk for the hour. We shake hands, we're like, we'll get this done, etc. Carlos walks in and says, Henry, we've been thinking, there's going to be a mistake made, and something's going to come up because we're working too fast, everybody's going to be tired, and we can't rely that you're going to sign the papers because there'll be a way out for you. Somebody's going to make a mistake that's going to allow you to exit, and we're not going to have a deal. even if we sign. So we need a 40 million euro deposit. This is 10 o'clock at night. He's telling me he needs 40 million the next day, right? Okay, sure. So I decide, let's go sit down with the CFO. So Mark's in the other room. I go sit with Mark, and I'm like, Mark, is there any way we can get 40 million euros by tomorrow? Probably not. He said, let me call Piotr. Piotr was our controller and treasury guy, and so called Piotr. Piotr's like, well, we have a $10 million limit on any new brand or new country. So we can't spend more than 10 million. And then it requires a waiver, and a waiver takes at least 6 weeks because there are 4 banks in the consortium, so we need to get all 4 banks together. And I said, so 10 million is all we're allowed to do without that, yes? He says, yes. So I said, well, what if we sent 10 million from Poland and 10 million out of the Czech bank account, and we didn't tell the bank that we had done the other one? Would they notice? Like, would the money leave before the bank noticed we had sent out 20 million just from 2 different bank accounts? And he's like, I don't know, maybe we could get away with it. There are 2 different banks. We might be able to get away with it. So I'm like, okay, Mark, that's the plan. Mark, you know how CFOs are, right? Mark doesn't think this is a good plan. So we're now ticking in around 11:30, and I'm like, okay. He's like, Henry, you have to have another answer. So I said, okay, who do I know that has $20 million that can give it to me tomorrow, right? Your list of friends that have $20 million that will give it to you, it's very small. I'm telling you, this is a very small list of people. So my first call is back to that PepsiCo guy I told you. Well, he happened to be the ex-CEO of PepsiCo. He ran the company for 27 years, Don Kendall. So I call up Don, and I get his assistant. Her name is Janet. She worked for him for 40 years. And Janet says, Henry, I'm so sorry. He's in a meeting in New York City, and I cannot disturb him. I can't help you. So I said, okay, well, tell him to call me when he gets out of dinner. But we're now, 11:30, 6 hours earlier back in New York, so I'm not going to hear from him for 2 or 3 hours. I'm like, okay, well, one of my investors was a very large private equity firm, one of the top 5 private equity firms in the world, headquartered in New York. So I'm like, well, private equity, big price, they must have like an $11 billion fund. They have 20 million sitting somewhere, right? So I call up the CEO and I'm like, Joe, here's the thing. We all like this brand. We're excited to buy this. Tell him quickly the story I just told you guys, basically. And I'm like, the problem is we don't even have a bank account because we didn't do business in Spain yet. We don't even have a corporate bank account in Spain. So you're going to have to send the 20 million to me personally. Not bad, right? I got lots of plans, right? I'm gone. So this guy's been running one of the top, Ps in the world. He goes, in my 30 years, I have never faced a question like this. I doubt it. I'm in Dallas. I'll be flying to New York soon, but I'm going to be off air for a couple of hours. I'll ask my CFO. I'll call you when I land. Great. So now we're working on documents. David Stolzczyk's my attorney, in-house Amrest attorney. At about 2:15, he literally falls asleep on the ground. I've lost my head lawyer, and he's just out. So like, David, you gotta go home. You gotta go to the hotel. It's only 2 blocks away. Go get a couple hours sleep. So he leaves. He says he'll be back at 6 a.m. Most of everybody else is working. I'm acting like everything is normal. Of course, we have the money. So Mark comes and he says, we called Beata, which was our top lead person, at midnight, a banker, and told her, was there any way we could do this? Because Henry, I just didn't feel comfortable doing it. This is a problem with CFOs. They feel like they have to be honest, right? It's a big problem. So he says, there's just no way we can send the 20 million. The max that we're allowed to send to a new country like this, our spending limit on a daily basis is €1 million. I said, okay. So David comes back in. No, sorry, I left out an important part. So Joe calls me at 3 in the morning, and he's landed back in New York, and he says, Henry, we're gonna do it. I'm like, is that the coolest thing in the world or what? That's unbelievable. That's trust. That's a great partner. We're going to send you 20 million to your account tomorrow. But it's going to be tough. You're not going to be able to close by 2 because by the time we get to the bank, send it, it's going to be 10 a.m. It's going to be 4 p.m. your time. But you'll have it. I'm like, wow. Okay, this is really cool. I'm feeling top of the world. I'm feeling king of the castle, right? And but we still need a plan B because other things could happen. So I go to Mark, I'm like, okay, let's take the pressure off. This is too much pressure on everybody. I think I'm gonna have the money, but just in case, here's what we're gonna do. So David comes in 6 a.m. I'm like, David, I have one important question for you. It's gonna be Friday. By the time this gets cleared, we're gonna sign the papers tomorrow, we're gonna initiate the wire, they're gonna get the money. Friday, they're gonna have their money. What if we send them 1 million from Poland and 1 million from Czech? And then when they call us on Friday and they say, hey guys, we only got 2 million instead of 20, I will say, you don't have to, I will say, are you kidding me? It was supposed to be 10 million. You mean the bank left a zero off twice? Like, now at this point you think I'm making this up, but I'm not. I'm really not. This is exactly what happened. So the guys are like, so my question, David, is, would we have a cure period? Like, would the courts uphold that we acted in good faith and just a mistake, and we would have till Monday or Tuesday or something to correct this problem to give me 3 more days to raise this money, right? And David says, yeah, I think any court would have to decide that you signed, you paid, you showed intentionality, and yes, I think the answer is yes. So I'm like, wow. Okay, right? We got a deal here. We're gonna make this happen. So we do, we work. 2 o'clock comes, all the paper, everybody's eyes, it's just like everybody's dead. And believe it or not, the private equity money did come through. We got the 20 million. We never had to do the 1 million game, which I was ready to do. And we closed, and that business has gone on to be a massive success. It's still the most profitable restaurant brand in Europe. It was a fantastic acquisition for us. Steve went on with us to stay a minority of 25%. He then converted his shares into our company shares. I asked him to join our board. He joined our board. He's a great friend. We increased the value of his stake from about 20 million to about 100 plus. So it was not a bad move for him. It was just overall an amazing success of the business. And everybody kept telling us throughout that crazy story I just told you, no way, this is never gonna happen, this is never gonna happen. And it was completely humiliating to lay down on the floor. It was completely awkward. But I think that's the true difference. And every single person in this room, because you're growing businesses, are gonna face these moments where everybody keeps telling you something is wrong or a bad idea or against trend or against, whatever it is, you're gonna hear it time after time. That it's just, no, it's not possible. And building up, practicing, pushing things to the limit is a skill. And you're gonna hear this in the third story, because the third story never could have happened without the story I just told you, without that experience. So the third story, what that says, because I know it's too small, but I'll read it to you. Amrest appoints Bradley Bloom, that's my company, by the way, right? Amrest. Appoints Bradley Bloom as chairman of supervisory board and Mark Chandler, that's the CFO who I was just talking about, as interim president of the management board. So in case you don't understand what that means is I just got fired. Okay, this is a document drafted by the board. And now let me tell you how we got to the point where I got fired. So we've gone 4 years since the last story, and we have just missed the best acquisition opportunity that the company had had in years. And the reason we missed it is that same super cool private equity partner I had who sent me $20 million to my private bank account, who I thought was the coolest guy in the world, was now 4.5 years into his investment. So what are private equity guys thinking about 4.5 years into their investment? They're thinking about getting out, right? They're thinking about leaving. So I didn't realize how much their mentality changes, but for an entrepreneur who's now 20 years in the business, I'm just thinking about the next 20 years and how do we grow the business and where do we go? And he says, look, there's no way. This thing, it puts more exposure on Spain. Spain, we're not clear, is it going to come out of the crisis? It could really affect the balance of the company to not be viewed as an emerging market, fast growth company. We could be viewed as a mature market, slowed down, in a recession. We can't take the risk that we muddy the exit story. We're not going to support it. So that was in April. And for the next couple of months, the relationship gets tougher. I'm like super disappointed. And then it turns out that since we don't buy it, our main competitor buys it. Like the worst possible answer to what could have happened. So at the time, I thought it was the best acquisition opportunity. In hindsight, it really was. It was a transformational deal. It really helped our competitor. And I was super disappointed at the time, and I was getting upset. So I started thinking over those 2 months how I can buy those guys out of the business. We're now looking at about $380 million to buy them out. And so, I start working, flying around, talking to family offices. I decided I didn't want another private equity. I wanted this to come from, people that had a longer term view of things. And I was just setting it up, and I knew that the private equity group was going to have a big success anyway. We had done very well over the 4.5 years they had been in. So they, of course, started working on their end. I'm working on my end. And luckily, my assistant finds out that Brad Bloom had changed his flight and was coming to Barcelona a day early. And then, okay, fine, people come to Barcelona, it's a nice city, you might want to come in today. And then a friend of mine who was on the board from Norway calls, and somehow I find out that he's coming in a day early, and I'm like, okay, something's wrong, this is not good, right? So I'm in Madrid, and there's no way I'm going to get to Barcelona the next day because I'm working on some La Tagliatella stuff with Steve. But I call a couple of people, and I'm like, I think that the opportunity to buy the business is speeding up. I really am going to have to know if you're interested at all. But I didn't know how bad things were, but I did know that I needed to be moving faster. So I catch a slightly earlier train, I get down to Barcelona, and the board is meeting without the chairman. I was chairman of the board. So it wasn't an official board meeting, of course, because I hadn't called it, but they were all meeting. So it was pretty clear to me that the writing was on the wall, that they were going to do something here. And I called up Mark Chandler here, and I said, Mark, I just have this feeling I'm going to be fired. And this has happened so quickly, I don't think they have any choices. So I think that you're going to be asked to fill in the role. He goes, oh my God, seriously? It's gotten that bad? And I said, I didn't know, it's just a feeling I have. So I don't know, maybe an hour or two goes by. It's 2:00 in the afternoon, and out comes these guys, and Pete Bassi, who was the vice chairman of the board, who I had known a long time because he was the president of international for Yum. So this was a guy who had run a tens of billion business, very senior, mature guy, and he says he wants to talk to me, and then he basically explains that the private equity group that doesn't have control, they only had 33% of the company, but felt that for us to do our fiduciary responsibility as a board, we needed to look at a transition from the founder CEO to someone else. So basically it was a nice way of saying, we need you out. You're being too conflictual. So I said, Pete, come on, this is not reasonable. You can't believe this is the right thing to do. And he says, Henry, I don't think it's the right thing. I voted against it, but at the end of the day, they made me feel and understand that we can't have a split vote on something like this. It just sends the wrong legal message out. We need to be unified on this. So I agreed it's the best thing for the company. I said, I can't believe this. So I called, so while this conversation was going on, the other 4 members are meeting with Mark. I didn't know that, but they're meeting with Mark. And they say to Mark, look, this was not planned. We've just come to this consideration. But we really need continuity because, as you saw, and I haven't spent a lot of time today, the culture of AmRest is super wonderful. It's very, very close. We've built this business from scratch. It's been a hugely emotional experience. My title is not Chief Executive Officer. My title at the company is Chief Emotional Officer. I named myself that in about 2011 because I realized that was my role in the company, was just driving the spirit and emotion and direction of the people in the business. And so Mark says to the board, I don't know, I need to talk to Henry. So Mark comes out of the meeting, I finished with Pete, and we meet, and he says, you know, this doesn't look good. They're very serious about this. What do you want me to say? And I said, well, what did they offer you? He said, well, they want to have 6 months to go out and do a proper search and find somebody with the experience and to lead the sale process so the private equity group can leave. And so they've offered me $1 million to take the role for the next 6 months in addition to my normal position. What do you want me to do? So I said, I'd really appreciate it if you went in and you said, no, thank you. Well, that's kind of a hard position to put somebody in, right? So he does. He goes back in the room and he says, no, thank you. And in the meantime, I called the rest of the executive team while Mark was in there talking to them, and I said, here's what just happened. I think you're probably going to get the next phone call. And, you know, nothing I can do. I don't have any power here. I just think we should stay together as a team. We've been through a hell of a lot. Let's go through this one. And the next phone call is Jacek, and Jacek says, no, thank you. Then it's Wojtek, he says, no, thank you. Then it's Melina, she says, no, thank you. All 7 people on the executive team are called and offered the same deal, and every one of them says, no, thank you. So you can imagine the just goosebumps I get all over my body. This is incredible, but it doesn't change the fact that they still want to let me go, right? So, and I would try to explain to you, some of you are maybe from Germany. There are some countries that have this split between a supervisory board and a management board. When you're on the supervisory board, you actually don't have any authority. It's only the management board that's allowed to sign things. So I didn't even have any legal authority in the company. I was just the chief emotional officer. But that was the spirit of the company. The spirit of the company was we stuck together and drove things, and I was really the CEO of the business. So the meeting adjourns. The board writes out a note that instead of meeting at our offices, which were an hour away, we were supposed to take a train ride. We have a factory in a city called Lerida in Spain. We would stay at the hotel because this was too sensitive. The employees shouldn't see it happening. We should stay at the hotel and we'll meet tomorrow morning. So I can't believe this is happening. It's set up for the next morning. I'm calling my lawyer in Warsaw. What are my options? What can I do? And he basically says, Henry, look, there's not a whole lot you can do. If the board is 6-1 against you, no court in the world is going to, override that just because the meeting wasn't called properly, because you should have called the meeting as the chairman. It's substance. that matters more here. You have to get somebody else on the board to vote against. So I said, okay. So I called Per, the Norwegian friend. I'm like, can I come to your hotel room? It's about midnight. I go over there. Wojtek, one of my exec members, and Mark come there as well. And I said, look, none of the management wants this. This company has been hugely successful for 23 years or whatever it was. We're going to let a short-term private equity disrupt this amazing culture. You know the company. You got to let the good guys win. That was it, right? And this was clearer to me than the last time, that this was being a long-term decision that was going to affect, I guess 25,000 people worked at the company at that time or something, was going to affect really the lives of people that had put their heart and soul into growing this. And so I gave him this, meaningful reason why he just couldn't vote with the New York private equity that was thinking of leaving in the next 18 months. And he said he agreed, but he wasn't gonna be the one to go in and create the problem. He just couldn't put himself in that position after what he had been through that day. Felt a little weak to me, but that's where we were. But he said he would vote with me if I got one more member. So I went back to Pete Bassi and I said, you told me today that you didn't believe this was the right thing. Here's the feedback from the lawyers. The lawyers say somebody else has got to vote with me. And Pete, I think I can buy this company in the next 3 days. He's like, what? I said, yes, I went through this. I can buy this company in the next 3 days. I can put together the money. He's like, there's no way. So I said, well, I will, but please give me a chance tomorrow morning. So I didn't sleep at all that night, not 1 minute. I was so nervous, as you can imagine. And I didn't want to be seen. And Pete and I had come up with the idea that what we were going to do is we were going to go get on the train like was scheduled originally, and we were going to go to our offices. And at 9:15, after a 15-minute grace period, I was going to send out a message to the board saying, very sorry, there's no quorum, everybody's not here, meeting adjourned, I'll call a new meeting as soon as possible. So I'm walking the streets of Barcelona trying not to be seen. 8:45, Pete and I meet at the train station. We hop on a train. Every minute feels like a lifetime. I'm sitting there in Barcelona. The express train between Madrid and Barcelona, with one stop in Lerida, is always on time. But this day, it's 9:03. It's 9:05. I'm like, oh my God. Somebody found out. They've called the train company. They've stopped the train. I can't believe the world is against me this much. I'm just sweating. I'm nervous as hell. I haven't slept. We get on the train. It comes. And then the next 3 minutes is a lifetime. I just keep saying, I go to the conductor. Why are we still in this station? Like, can we get out of here? Finally, we do. We pull out. We get out of the tunnel. I send the email. Very sorry. It seems there's been some sort of misunderstanding. Pete Bassi, the vice chairman, Henry McGovern, the chairman of the board, are both on the train. No one else is here. There seems to be a lack of quorum. Sorry for the miscommunication. I'll call a new meeting as soon as everybody's calendar allows. Can you imagine the CEO of one of the world's largest private equity getting that email while he's sitting in a conference room in a hotel in Barcelona? His one thought is, I'm going to kill this son of a bitch. I am going to kill this guy. So I get back a super aggressive email from the secretary of the board saying, this is not what was agreed yesterday. It's fully documented. And I said, well, check with your attorney. They have 2 attorneys sitting in the room. They all discuss. The attorneys are like, I think it'd be pretty risky to act like this is an official board meeting without the chairman and the vice chairman. Clearly there's some misunderstanding. So the situation is I'm sort of afraid to go back to Barcelona. I haven't slept. My daughter's coming the next day, which is going to relax me a bit, with my wife, and we were going to go spend the weekend up on the seashore up just north of Barcelona. So I've got this idea in my mind, and I'm like, okay, Henry, do you keep working, or do you take the weekend and think and relax and try and clear the mind and see what comes to you? And I think back to the La Tagliatella story, and I'm like, no, you just got to keep going. You can't stop at this point. So I decide I'll go back, I'll face Joe, who's super angry, and I do, but I don't want to do it in a closed room, so I meet him out on the street, and we take a little walk together, and he basically explains that he's never had a situation where a CEO stood in his way like this. I said, but Joe, you don't have control of this company. You have 33%. You may act like it, but you don't have it. And in the best interest of the company, I'm acting in what I think is the best interest of the company. I'm sorry, but I will have somebody ready to buy you out by next Wednesday. He says, what the hell do you mean you'll have somebody? Nobody's going to tell me when I have to exit an investment. And I said, well, go back to New York, think about it, and tell me. He said, no, if you have somebody who wants to buy the company, tell me who they are right now. I said, okay, I'll tell you tomorrow morning before you leave back to New York. Yep, you got it. So for the next 6 hours, I'm on the phone calling everybody I know with $380 million. The list just got shorter. So I call everybody I know in the world with $380 million, and I say, I've got a deal for you. Trust me. And unbelievably, one family's like, we just could never pull the money together this quickly. Due diligence, we'll never get it through. But I know you, we've talked a long time about getting involved with AmRef. I'll put 50 million up. So I'm like, okay, well, I could put up 50 million. So now I'm at 100. Now I need 280. So I get another guy who says I can put up 50 to 70. Like, okay, we're closing in on it. And that was the end of my friends. I didn't have any more friends. They were done. And this one family office, who has a very large family office, about 10 billion, says, we'd love to do it. We want to be in the consumer space. And it was the family that had built up Modelo beer in Mexico. And they said, I said, well, is there any crazy chance you could be in Barcelona by tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.? And believe it or not, the guy says yes. 7 hours of driving in a car by one of their guys. Another guy flies in. At 7 a.m., they meet, not me, I'm not allowed in the room. And they convince Joe that they are serious and that they'll close by next week. So for the next, I go to the beach for a day, and I see a YPO friend of mine. He goes, Henry, you've got to have a name for this. You know, you've got to have like a code name for the action. We're going to call it Karate Kill. Like, that's the worst name I've ever heard. But okay, we're going to go with Karate Kill, that's it. So for the next 4 days, I have to work simultaneously on, if it fails, what are my legal rights? How do I keep control of this so I can find enough time to buy them out? Or how do I get this deal done? So literally, I work half the day on my legal plan for keeping my job so I have time to buy the business back. And then the other half of the day on closing this deal. Unbelievably, we do get it done. We buy them out. And even though we were a mature company, and I think a lot of you know Vern Harnish because Vern Harnish spoke here a couple of years ago. And Vern had told me like 10 years before, when I was going through a major growth challenge, I had gone to China and I was looking at how Chinese companies grow. And I was figuring out how could we triple the company in 3 years. So I went to China with my executive team and we studied companies that had tripled in 3 years, or at least doubled in 3 years. And we came up with this plan. And so he told me, Vern told me back then, he said, Henry, companies do their best growth when they hit 20 years old. There's something about the maturity of the company, the maturity of the team, the customer relations, everything is allowed to grow even faster at 20 years. So if we go back, what we're talking about is right here. We're talking about this. And we decide we can do a lot. So I invest back in with this company. We managed to get the acquisition done. We bought it at an $800 million valuation. And then I just sold in May at a 3.9 billion valuation. So in the 3.5 years since 2015 to now, to getting that deal done, we more than tripled the business again at a very mature stage. So Wszystko jest możliwe. Thank you guys very much. Great.